going to take a little break from from anything from Donald Trump to Pete Davidson.
No more horse face talk for the day?
No, we're putting horse face down for just a moment.
Okay.
And the Saudi Crown Prince, who I never have discussed as much in my life as I have in the last 2 days.
It's sort of relevant right now.
But there's a book out called The League, and this came across our desk. I looked at it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is perfect. If you are a football fan, if you're specifically a Chicago Bears fan, there's a reason that Chicago Bears fans feel superior to all other football fans except for the Green Bay Packers, which is why that rivalry is so important, is because these are the two founding principal anchors of the NFL that ended up, changing a number of times throughout the decades. But, the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears are still the same. Still the same. And they come from that same tradition. Although the uniform's a little different because I guess they wore blue back then because I hate that throwback uniform.
I know.
But anyway, the book is written by a guy named John Eisenberg. And John, thank you so much. Appreciate you being with us.
Happy to be with you. Thank you.
And the book starts with George Halas. And this is the foundation of the NFL started in a downtown Loop hotel. George Halas being asked to meet with this guy who owned this plant right out in Decatur, who wanted to build a football team. And George Halas had been an athlete and played some football, but really, there was no professional football for him to play. He was, I think, and people might know this, but this is right at the beginning of your book. People should understand. George Halas was on the New York Yankees for a very short period of time. He was a right fielder and replaced in right field by who, John?
Yeah, a guy named Babe Ruth.
Yes.
Wow.
Think about that for a second. I wonder if Halas ever thought to himself, damn it, I know I got this football team, but God, if I could have just been... Oh, man. All right, so let's go back to that moment. Let's go back to the moment where Halas gets hired. The professional football, and this is in 1920, professional football had been kicking around because, the Green Bay Packers are, 1 or 2 years older than the Chicago Bears, right?
Right, and this actually predates the NFL. I mean, yes. I mean, it is. I mean, the Packers predate the start of the NFL. That's what pro football was in 1920 was just really sandlot teams, and a lot of them represented companies. And that's what, it was just, we have a company, we're going to have a football team, maybe we'll advertise our products a little bit, and it's just like almost neighborhoods, little industrial towns. And so that's what Halas was asked to start by A.E. Staley Company. It was a starch manufacturer in Decatur.
And he actually went to Decatur, he much to the chagrin of his family. He's from Pilsen. He was born and raised in Pilsen, by the way, George Halas was. And much to the chagrin of his family, he was on his way to, going to make himself something, and his mom was all upset that he was playing football and he was going to hurt himself, which is what every mom to this day, 100 years later, is still worried about.
Funny
right?
how that one stands the test of time.
Yeah, and he was like, nope. He met this guy in a hotel in downtown Chicago, and he's like, I'm going out, and he told his parents he was going to go learn how to make starch. That was and they're like, okay,
that's how he got in there.
Yeah, I guess that's how it's going to work. And now explain what. Now the part that I think is like that seminal moment, and I know that was it 2 years ago for the NFL opener when it was the Bears Packers, not this year but 2 years ago. They did that open reel where they did a recreation, like a Dodge commercial where they show you the Dodge brothers. They did a recreation of Curly Lambeau and George Halas and getting together. I mean, what is the story of how the Packers and the Bears actually became the NFL?
Well, they started the league in Canton, Ohio. There was a league forming of these sandlot teams in Ohio, and Halas, he was starting his team in Decatur, and he didn't like the caliber of the opposition he was looking at, so he reached out to these people that had started a league in Ohio, and he got a nice response. So he went up and they had an organizational meeting, and he was the only, out of all these founding fathers, I mean, he's the only one you've ever heard of. He went to this meeting, and that's where the NFL started. And so that fall, it was the fall of 1920, I mean, it wasn't called the NFL then, but that's where the league began. In that auto showroom was where they had their meeting on a September night in 1920, and House was there.
Wow. John, I'm always curious, authors, this is a colossal project to take on. This is the NFL. This is nearly 100 years worth of information. I love how, as Ro mentioned, how you guys started, really the whole story about the meeting in the hotel room and all. What's sort of the behind the scenes for you putting this project together? Who did you talk to, and anybody locally here in Chicago, to get all this information that you have? Because there's a lot here.
A lot of depth.
Yes.
Well, I really focused on the first 3 or 4 decades of the league and sort of how they got through those years when, the NFL was really really a failing enterprise for a number of years. And, the Bears were pretty good. The Giants in New York were pretty good. The Packers were pretty good. But most teams were folding, and then, it was really a struggle. So that's what I focused on those years. So, of course, and I really focused on the 5 owners who sort of shepherded the league through those years. And of course, they're all long passed away, but their kids, their daughters, or grandchildren are still in the league, most of them. So I came to Chicago. I interviewed Virginia McCaskey, owns the Bears, and I interviewed her sons who were running the Bears, and it was just tremendous. I mean, interviewing Virginia McCaskey, I will never forget it. She's in her 90s. She owns the Chicago Bears, and she really, her memory stretches back almost to the entire breadth of the National Football League's history.
Right.
So when I told people around the league, yes, I interviewed her, they said, that's like interviewing like Martha Washington, or George Washington's daughter or something like that.
True.
It's incredible. And I really treasured that interview. It was just memorable.
You're getting a lot of credit for the way you paint the picture, and that you feel like you're breathing the air at the time when these 5 men got together, or the founding fathers, the original teams, decided to build this league. And I one of the things I wondered, as you heard the stories from relatives and that kind of thing, it seemed as if many of them played sports, and how much of this was love of this game, and how much was it to build this big business that eventually would become something successful.
Well, it's so funny because, making a profit was like the last thing on their minds, because there was no money on the table. They were, all they had was an idea. They loved the idea of professional football. College football was very popular. High school football was popular. And Hallis had the idea. It's like, well, when you're done playing college football, you really should be a better player. And so let's try to build a better brand of football. And America didn't buy it for years. They just didn't think, they liked college football much more. So that's all these guys had, was really a love of this idea. And in many respects, this is my 10th book, and I like them to sort of tell a larger theme. And in many respects, it's sort of a story of 20th century America. I mean, Hallis, he's a son of immigrants, and these are immigrant tales. These guys, they were not rich. There was no one going to step in and bail them out. I mean, it was just them and their love of this idea. And, they just tried to make a go of it any way they could. And there was certainly no thought it would ever become nearly as successful as it has.
What is fascinating to me is that of these 5 founding families, 3 of the families are still actively involved.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You've got the Mara family with the Giants. Mm-hmm. You have the Rooney family with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And of course, the Hallis with the Bears, and the McCaskey family now is, of course, the Hallis family. And then when you stop and you think about now that Rooney Mara, right? Now think about that for a second. The actress Rooney Mara,
they're connected to both.
She's connected to both. Right, because like a lot of these things, you got to intermarrying.
Right,
it's like
football royalty.
Right, it's like the Ford family that owns the Detroit Lions, and the woman their Virginia McCaskey, who is
Ford, Martha Ford,
Martha Firestone Ford, because the tires had to marry the cars.
Oh,
I mean, you got to think about how all these families did it, but these families were not. I mean, the Fords and Firestones, that's a different story. But these stories, these other families, you point out, were not rich. And it turns out that the McCaskey family, which is the Hallis family, it's the only family in this that is still their only asset, their only business is the football team.
Well, yes, that is so true. And when I interviewed Hellis's daughter and his grandkids and various Chicago experts, on football history, and I was just stunned, really, as a researcher, to really understand that. Yeah, that was their only asset, and he just didn't have very much money. I mean, the NFL, we think of titans of industry now, but I mean, George Halas, he was barely keeping it going in the 1920s and 1930s. Certainly, when the Depression hit, he took money from his kids' college funds.
Yeah,
and 1 year he didn't have money to pay like Bronco Nagurski. He gave him IOUs. And they took the IOUs.
Wow.
I mean, so it's just unfathomable, really. But he struggled. He had a cleaning business. He ran a basketball team. He sold cars. He did anything he could because the Bears certainly weren't bringing it in. So he was doing anything he could to have enough money to run the Bears.
And by the 1960s, he was wearing a fur coat on the sidelines.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Who can forget?
Well, let me tell you, everything changed.
Yeah, it did. Well, and what was that change moment? Television, right?
Absolutely. Television in the 50s. I mean, certainly the story of the book is that, I mean, they spent years tinkering with the rules and making pro football more interesting and separating it from college football. But then, right as the game was sort of taking off as the league, more interesting with a league of quarterbacks, television lights came on and suddenly there was money on the table and suddenly there was a lot of money on the table and that's nobody saw that coming, but that is what really changed the economics. It was the onset of television.
What can, as you look at the NFL now, and again, it's a game of billionaires, and I think when the McCaskey family eventually decides they're going to sell this, they're going to sell it to a billionaire, and these billionaires are building these incredible stadiums, and like Jerry Jones, building a monument,
small village, basically,
right, to himself.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what sports ownership is in the 21st century, but they build these gigantic enterprises. What message can be taken from not only the George Hallases and the Maras, but also the Lamar Hunts and the guys who built the AFL and then built a merger system to be able to, on a shorter term investment as they had, to be able to put all of that together. And those are guys who, those to me, those AFL guys are just as much of a hero to me as the founding NFL guys, because they realized that they needed to bring football, they competitive football in New York with a number of teams, and then they brought it out west. And I just think it's a fascinating moment in commerce. But what can, from those stories of the founders and then the second evolution of it to now, these guys, what should these billionaires learn from those original masters?
Well, I actually asked Virginia McCaskey that. I said, what lesson would resonate today? And she thought about it, and she said, really, the thing that those guys did was the game came first. Focus on your product. It is the game that matters most. The real success of the NFL is they took a sport that honestly was boring, and they did so many things to it to make it more interesting, and they changed it, and they continually shaped it and made it more interesting, and that would be one thing. I mean, that's ongoing today, by the way. With all the,
you got a lawyer with you watching the game.
Was that a catch?
The rules. I mean, the rules are so confusing now. I mean, that's the beauty that they all have to hire a guy that they go to wearing a 3-piece suit to go. Can you explain what just happened and who's going to get sued? All right, you got to read this book, John Eisenberg. Congratulations on this. It's an amazing piece of work. It's called The League: How five rivals created the NFL and launched a sports empire, and it is fascinating. And as you point out, it's a great history book because it not only, even if you don't love football, you're going to love it because it's a story of 20th century America. It's amazing stuff. John, congratulations.
Well, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
All right, thank you.